Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known as the War Hamster. Joining me as usual is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V Gibbs.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Those of us who are regular watchers know that we've been going through Madison's notes from the 1787 Philadelphia Convention, word by word. We're taking a break from that this week, and we're going to do a show that's somewhat timely, I guess, about the, I guess I'm going to call this the California election postmortem. Doug and I are both recent escapees from California, but we still have a lot of interest in what goes on there and still talk to a lot of people that are deeply involved in politics. And we thought we'd give you kind of an informational breakdown and maybe end with a little bit of optimism of how things might be getting a little bit better in the near future. Sound good?
Sounds good.
So to start with, California elections are a white hot mess. They've got
and so Spencer Pratt knows.
Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about him in a second. California has the holy trinity of, shall we say, election fraud opportunity. They've got MotorVoter, you've got ballot harvesting, and you got universal mail-in ballots. And all three of those things, each of them by themselves, create opportunity for fraud, distrust in the system. When you put them all together, it's pretty bad. And the last thing California does is they allow counting for up to, I don't know, like a month after the election. And it's just so rife with opportunity for malfeasance that people don't trust it at all. But we'll start with what they did about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. They switched to what's called a jungle primary system. Doug, what is a jungle primary?
Jungle primary is the ultimate open primary. For those of you who are not familiar with the primary system, a closed primary, each party has, their players go into the ring and fight it out on primary day, and then the victor gets to be on the ballot in November. In an open primary, each party does that, but it allows people from either party to vote on either side, but each side still gets its winner. Jungle primary says, parties don't matter. Top two vote getters are on the ballot in November, nobody else, which does a couple of things. It allows the opportunity for one party to have two candidates on the ballot. And the second thing that is really, I think, egregious is it pretty much knocks any of the smaller party candidates completely out of any possible contention, even appearing on the ballot in November.
Yeah, and we know some of these candidates personally, especially for the governor race in California. We've both consulted for a number of these people over the last few cycles. So this is personal to us. So why would a state go to a jungle primary? Well, it's a Democrat-run state, and the Democrats love the jungle primary. Their idea...
Super majority in both houses, by the way.
Yeah. And we've talked about that, Reynolds v. Sims, but we're not going to go there today. What they want to do, I mean, really the grand strategy is, why would they want two Democrats running against each other for governor? Or the other big race this time of year was the Los Angeles mayor. We want two Democrats at the top of the ticket because what happens is that kills Republican turnout in the November elections, and that impacts the down ballot races, the local races. And everything's local. That's what matters. That's how you take back your state and get a voice back as you win local elections.
And they know this, and so they're killing it before the bud even gets out of the dirt.
Yeah, and like I said, we've got the holy trinity of opportunities for fraud. So with the governor race, Steve Hilton was the top Republican, and the results as of right now this morning, you had Javier Becerra with 27.9% of the vote. Steve Hilton got 25%, and the third place was Democrat Tom Steyer at 22.5%. They've called the race for Hilton. So you are going to get a Republican at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, and I think the only reason why that happened is they're more afraid of Steyer than they are Hilton, but that's beside the point.
Well, yeah, Steyer's got a lot of money they could throw at it. And that's a very valid point. Steyer is a billionaire, and he's a bit of a wacko. Now, the other issue they're dealing with is Becerra might be facing some criminal charges here coming up, but we'll see how that plays out. The race that got a lot of national attention was the Los Angeles mayor race. And this is where our boy Spencer Pratt ran one of the more brilliant campaigns I think we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Spencer Pratt got away from partisan politics and stuck with the issues. Basically, how to clean up Los Angeles, clean up the homes.
Now to say something really quick about him, I kind of have an inside track on him a little bit. Is he was raised in more or less pretty conservative circles, his family, and now that said, being involved in Hollywood, even though it's a reality star, you do get that left-wing attack on your brain. So he kind of began life kind of more conservative than a lot of people understand or believe. But he, as he's gotten older, he's had a real distaste for party politics. And so he really considers himself an independent, but he kind of leans in the conservative direction. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a super conservative or MAGA or anything like that. He's not. And there's a bunch of issues where he's kind of a little off, but he leans in that direction. Okay, go ahead and continue.
No, that's really part of his appeal, especially in a blue city like Los Angeles, is he can cross over because he's talking about everyday things. And that's something local politicians are going to have to pick up on leading into November. You do not have to make this a partisan far right versus far left issue. That's not the way to win. He did remarkably well. And what you saw happen on election day is he had a very comfortable lead over third place Rahman, who's basically a nobody in no one had ever heard of her 2 months ago. And he starts running these amazing attack ads on Stacey Karen Bass, who is basically a communist Cuban operative and has been for years. All of a sudden, after the election, these votes start coming in, and they came in a huge proportion for Rahman over Bass and Pratt. And eventually, you see here at the very end here, she's now passed him up, and he will not be, it looks like, in the top two. It won't be in the November election, which is a crying shame. Why would Democrats want to get rid of him? Well, obviously, they don't want to deal with 5 months of brilliant AI-generated attack ads. Karen Bass is just getting...
That's part of it, and plus also anybody that's not them doesn't deserve to be in power from their point of view. And, not that I'm trying to steal any thunder here, but I said to my wife when this first started, you watch, he'll be fine until the very last minute once they realize how many votes they need. And then Rahman will come in and get just enough.
Yeah, and that's really, I'm glad you said that, because we're going to hit on that. That's going to be most of the show is how they actually do that. So let's go through the holy trinity and the vulnerabilities of elections. We'll start with MotorVoter. So in California and many other states, they'll issue a driver's license to anybody, and then they will automatically register you to vote there on the spot, whether you ask them to or not.
And there's a number of states that do that, but California, or at least in this region, is the only one with that holy trinity completely.
Yeah, and what's the problem with that? What happens?
The MotorVoter, well, citizens aren't the only people to get driver's licenses.
Bingo.
And you're automatically being registered. And the other problem with that is when you go to register, you pick your party. When you have MotorVoter, it automatically makes you a nobody. So, and if you don't check the right box, or you don't realize, or when you receive your little email thing or mail thing, should I say, and you don't realize what you need to do, then it also shoots you out of the primary. In the case of the state of Oregon, where we have MotorVoter here. So what happens is more often than not, the Republicans get the more moderate candidate because a lot of your Republican voters either are not registered as Republican because they didn't realize they needed to when the MotorVoter happened, or, and I've seen this happen personally with my own wife, they get knocked out of the party, then they gotta go back and fix it, but by then it's too late because they didn't get a chance to vote in their primary. And so there's a lot of shenanigans that goes on with MotorVoter, and it takes the choices out of your hand, and also it opens up the door for people who are not citizens to be registered, because a lot of these states are issuing licenses to illegal aliens, and you've got even perfect people who are here legally but they're permanent residents, so they can't vote or not supposed to vote, and so the list goes on and on and on. So MotorVoter really does open up the opportunity to fill the voter rolls with people who shouldn't be voting.
Yeah, and you combine that with the fact that they don't maintain the rolls at all. People move out of state and they stay on the rolls. Now, I have to check every year now that I'm out of California to make sure I'm not voting. I check to make sure my dead parents aren't voting. But and dead people that they don't take them off the list. So you get the voter rolls, and that's where it all starts. Was having voter rolls, and you can tell trends by voter registration in many states. You can't in California because you can't trust them. You get many counties in California where you have more registered voters than you even have eligible voters. And that should be statistically impossible. I mean, that should be a giant red flag. I mean, anybody remotely interested in holding legitimate elections that the public can trust, just let's put the brakes on here, clean up these rolls, and make sure that we at least have the right people voting. They've got no interest in doing. They have no interest in doing that in California.
Well, what you see in California is two things. You see more registered voters than eligible voters. And then sometimes in certain districts, you'll see more votes by more voters than registered voters. So it's kind of a double whammy that's happening because of the multiple voting also.
I mean, everyone goes, you can't prove there's been fraud. Well, yeah, you can. If more people voted than live there, then you got something wrong with your system, that you do not have a legitimate election. It's proven right there. It simply is an impossibility, but they don't. There's no proof. We hear that over and over again. Yeah, there is, but it's right there. You cannot have more votes or more registered voters than you have eligible, period. I mean, the feds ought to be coming in the next day when that happens. Second issue we have is ballot harvesting. And really what happens is you get, the Democrats spend a lot of their campaign money. Now, some of that's drying up with USAID money being shut down. So they don't have as deep of a war chest as they used to, but they still have a ton of government money. Your tax dollars are getting funneled to NGOs that ostensibly, under the guise of charity, have their missions. But really what they are is their voter registration and ballot harvesting machines. And you'll see things like a single address, 1-bedroom apartment will have 20 people registered. An empty parking lot will have 15 registered voters. You'll see these NGO activists going out to the homeless shelters and senior homes and
homes and things like that. Someone who hasn't voted in 10 years because they're catatonic are suddenly voting.
Yeah, and they'll go out there and they'll take your ballot and and of course there's no chain of custody. We have no idea if this person actually voted or not. And they could be all kinds of fictitious votes in there.
And that always happens when you have more hands. Every time you add one more hand on that ballot that touches it, the chain of custody weakens. And so this is where, a lot of and we'll get more into the mail-in and all that, but the more hands you have on it, the more chance for fraud. Simple as that. And it's hard to keep control of chain of custody in that sense.
Yeah, and that's supposedly they say they've got checks and balances on that. We'll touch on mail-in balloting. That's the third one. They send a mail-in ballot out to every single voter, whether you want to do it in person or not. And what happens quite often is someone will show up at the polls, and they'll say, "Oh, you've already voted," and you didn't. But that's because someone got to your mail or what have you, your mail-in ballot. And there's thousands or more examples of this happening, and it goes back to the still goes back to the chain of custody. The U.S. Postal Service is supposed to be trustworthy. It's a federal government, but most of these people that work in the Postal Service are union members, and they're vastly outnumber. They vastly vote Democrat over Republican. Mm-hmm. We've had a whole lot of anecdotal evidence over the last 6-7 years of mail-in ballots, a bunch of Republican districts, we'll find them in a ditch or stuff like that. So I don't necessarily, even with the chain of custody, with a postmark and everything like that, do I trust the U.S. Postal Service to be delivering the ballots legitimately.
Now, understand, audience, we're not talking about absentee ballots. We're talking about mail-in voting. There is a difference. Absentee balloting is where you've requested it for a very good reason. You've given that reason, and you get one to mail. That's different. That is it happens more rarely, and there are those situations. When I went off to boot camp, it was in 1984. It was election year, and so I filed for an absentee ballot. So while I was in Meridian, Mississippi at school, I was able to vote in my California, election. And that's an absentee ballot. That's different. We're not, and the reason why I bring this up is because one of the arguments of the left, oh, so you don't want the military bill voting with it. That's not what we said. Then they're going to play this game. We're talking about this universal mail-in balloting, and understand something else. I live in a state where we don't have ballot harvesting because we don't have polling places. Everything's mail-in here. You know, you either you get your ballot by the mail, and then you either mail it back or you drop it off in a box. And they do have laws here. Technically, you're supposed to be the only one that drops off yours in the box and all that jazz. Although that's been loosening up of late too, here in Oregon. But the whole game is about getting their hands on your ballot before it gets counted, which I don't know if you have in store for us, but that's why precinct counting also is so important. They don't want you to, they don't want it counted. They don't want it looked at until they get it in their hot little hands, and then they decide behind closed doors what it says. You know, we could eliminate all of this with precinct counting. Then you send them in, then they count them. If the numbers match, we're good. If not, we have an issue. That's really the best way to do this. But anyway, I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, if we look at this from a criminal standpoint, you know, how does law enforcement look at issues? The first thing to look for is, do you have motive? Do you have the means? And is there opportunity? And with this holy trinity of voting, so what's the word to use? Shabbiness, looseness. Obviously, you have a motive for political power. And so the motive is not really hard. Do the Democrats have a motive to cheat? Yeah, they absolutely do. It's all about political power. Do they have the means? We just described how they created the means. Every single one of these abnormal election processes creates an opportunity. And that's the third one. Mass mail-in ballots. Absolutely. Expanded mail-in ballot creates a lot more opportunity. And everyone knows, you can go back to a 2010 study led by Jimmy Carter, Democrat. It was bipartisan, and they analyzed our election integrity, and they came to the conclusion, and we pull up the New York Times article, mail-in balloting vastly increases the opportunity for election fraud. So you've got motive, you've got means, you've got opportunity, and then you get the cherry on top of the cake that California decided, even though there's election day, we'll keep counting. You know, as long as you say you postmarked your ballot by election day, we'll keep counting up to 30 days after the election. Now, what we observe in that Los Angeles mayor race is, you know, that gives them the opportunity to say, oh, he's, you know, the one we want to win, Rahman, or to finish second, is 45,000 votes behind. So we're just going to keep counting ballots. We don't, you know, nobody knows where they came from until we get the required number. We've seen this over and over again. This goes, you know, takes us back to the 2020 presidential election. And that is a big issue, with being able to, you know, there's no election day. So here's the good news.
Now let me add one more thing, because you said something that was fascinating to me. You talked about law enforcement investigating. They also know that could be a problem. And Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco, and see, because unfortunately for California, there are law enforcement personnel who are not hard left. Chad Bianco being one of those guys. So he seized 650,000 ballots from California's November 2025 special election on Prop 50, because there was all kinds of evidence of, you know, games going on there in Riverside County. It was based on claims that a local activist group called the Riverside Election Integrity Team had this group alleged that they found 45,896 more ballots counted than were cast. And so that's the reason why he did this. And so what was the response by California? To pass a law, SB 73, to outlaw investigating any potential fraud. So they understand what they're up against. They understand that the walls might be closing in certain areas. So what do? They pass, because they got super majority in California, just pass a law saying, well, you can't investigate. So they literally signed a law blocking investigators from looking into fraud in California. Yeah,
and this recent election, you know, the U.S. Department of Justice, you know, had some. Sorry, what's the attorney's name again? The U.S. attorney.
You talking about Blanche?
No, the one who's investigating the elections in California. You knew the name.
Asaley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's trying to, there's like
Sharp
23
kid.
states.
I've met him. Sharp kid.
Yeah, apparently he's a bit of a bulldog, and he's trying to get investigate some things. But this whole system is set up in such a way that it's really hard to find proof. It's you can't prove it. Na 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 na. That's what they've been doing since 2020 because there's no chain of custody, and with so many points of failure along this whole process.
And that's how these fact checkers work, by the way. The first thing that they'll say when you look something up is, well, there's no evidence.
Well, yes, then the whole system's specifically designed to make it so you can't get evidence. And then you got a state like California saying that you can't look at federal government, can't look at our elections. Elections are local.
Yeah, if you think you have evidence, none of your business.
And then the courts, when you do take something to the court, these 60 cases, they'll say, yeah, the courts have thrown out 60 cases. Well, they never looked at the evidence. They either got thrown out on standing, or what they call latches, timing. You're not the party to bring the suit, or you didn't do it. You didn't sue before the election, and then you can't sue after the election. And then they also come up with something called it's moot. It doesn't matter. We can't reverse the results. Well, yeah, you can, but.
And by the way, also remember they've inserted now this narrative that if you try to look into it, you're trying to reverse the election. You're trying to reverse an election, which makes you an insurrectionist. And so
election denier.
Yeah. So and so they've crafted this. Matter of fact, that was a part of the reason why Kristen Welk and President Trump in this recent interview where he walked out. That was a part of it. It amazes me because none of the media is showing the part that really got him fired up. I've watched the entire interview. The part that got Trump fired up is when she started playing the game with January 6ers and because overturned the election. So they're a bunch of dangerous insurrectionists, and you let all these dangerous people out. And that's the way they see it. If you dare question their elections, you are a danger. Well, you are a danger to them, but they're trying to frame it in such a way, that your children on the street are in danger if they're on the streets or something, if they believe this because they're election deniers. But anyway, so they framed it quite well. One thing I can say about the progressive left in this country is they know how to market and they know how to frame things.
Well, yeah, that's the problem is the people are questioning the election didn't frame it properly. They call us election deniers. No, we're not denying an election took place. What we're saying, we've been saying this since November 2020, is there were enough anomalies that we've got questions we'd like to answer. And the fact that you won't let us ask those questions is really telling. People, what do you have to hide? Why can't we ask these questions? There's a lot of anomalies in 2020. There's a lot of anomalies in LA. We've just spent 20 minutes telling you about all the loopholes they specifically designed to put into the California system to make it so that we have, we don't know what happened. There's no chain of custody. So yeah, we've got questions and you won't let us ask them. That tells us an awful lot. We're not denying a darn thing. We know their election took place. We voted in it. But so it's not election denial at all. It's, we've got legitimate questions and you've got something to hide. Otherwise you open the books and let us look at it. I don't think a public official should be able to certify an election with that many anomalies. The whole point of certifying, when you certify an election, you are telling the people that the elections followed the letter of the law. And with all these anomalies we've seen in recent elections, I don't think you can certify a lot of these elections. Right. You can't say that we followed the law. Now in California, they just changed the law, so they are following the law. What they're doing is legal. It's dishonest. It's full of loopholes, but it's legal. They're not breaking the law.
Before California decided to legalize ballot harvesting was illegal in all 50 states. I mean, it was already illegal. It wasn't something that they just came up with, hey, let's do this. It had already been tried in the past and had been made illegal in all 50 states.
Yeah, for a very good reason. You want the legal voter, to cast the vote. And you need to know, everyone else needs to know that that's the person who cast the vote. When you can go out there and show up at a drop box with 50 ballots, nobody knows who filled them out. They're not checking signatures. I mean, they made the signature checking laws a joke, and we've got the technology to make this almost 100% foolproof. There's a gentleman up in Shasta County, the recorder up there. He's created a video system that everybody should adapt. And I'm going to have him on, Clint, I forget his last name, but I'm going to have him on the show soon because he actually designed a system. This is the guy who's the whistleblower when the Bush administration actually hired him to create code that allowed them to shift elections with machines.
I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on a podcast with him last week with on a panel with Kim Yater, and for the love of God, I'm forgetting his last name, but good guy. So there's hope, though, people. There really is hope. And the thing that we may see, this may be the very last election in this country where ballots are counted after Election Day. And the reason for that is a Supreme Court case. Let me pull it up. Called Watson versus Republican National Committee. We're over on SCOTUS blog, and I've gone through a bunch of these briefs. We're not going to do them all today. One of the things that's interesting about this is you can see an awful lot of amicus briefs were filed. An amicus brief is a friend of the court filing on behalf of one of the parties. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, the Watson in the state of Mississippi was the Secretary of State, and Republican National Committee, the Libertarian Party, and a few other parties brought lawsuit about the law in Mississippi that allowed them to count ballots up to 5 days after the election.
And I want people to really recognize what's happening here. Mississippi is not some blue state, but they have infiltrated these positions, even sometimes as Republicans throughout the country. And what's his name? Douglas. Dr. Douglas, I can't remember his last name. There's the event that
Douglas Frank.
Douglas Frank, thank you, or bow tie guy, as my wife likes to call him. And he with his work he's done, he shows that there are problems with the legislatures and with elections and what's going on in all 50 states, even places like Wyoming. So understand something. This is not just something that is only appearing in blue states or just appearing in a red state with a blue Secretary of State. This is a problem in all 50 states. Go ahead.
And it's gotten much worse since COVID. They use that as an excuse to make mail-in balloting seem normal. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's safer. I mean, I've always said the whole COVID thing was blown out of proportion for the specific purpose of stealing the 2020 election via mail-in ballots. I mean, that's been part of my thesis. So what's interesting about all these amicus briefs, or briefs amici, however you want to say that, is an awful lot of them filed on behalf of Watson. It means they have all these groups have a vested interest in making sure that after post-election day voting is allowed to continue. And there's a whole bunch of these briefs. Unified Latin American Citizens, National Congress of American Indians, League of Women Voters, Professor Michael T. Morley.
And League of Women Voters, that's not exactly a MAGA organization.
No, these are all far left organizations. Mm-hmm. District of Columbia, Campaign Legal Center. These are, it goes on and on. The Democratic National Committee filed, so they have a vested interest in this case. So this is a big deal. Supreme Court heard oral arguments on what date was that? It was in March. So just happened a couple months ago. And we expect the actual decision in late June, early July. So that's why I say this could be the last election with late voting. And we're going to get into this.
Yeah, and it centers on the interpretation of like 5 or 6 different federal election day statutes. And the question comes down to A, can the federal government make those laws? B, what was the original meaning of those laws? C, what's the original public understanding when an election is complete? And then finally, and I said this as A, but I think it's bears repeating actually, is, the Constitution, what is that allocation of power? Is it given to the states? Is it given to Congress? Is it a little bit of both? And, I've been teaching in my classes ever since, I started these classes, and sometimes I would get people upset at me when I'd say this, to say, so, well, the elections belong to the states. And then I'll add, but it says in Article 1, Section 4, that Congress may make law when they feel that they need to change regulation. And this was actually debated heavily during the convention. There were a lot of delegates in the convention that were very upset that Congress could make this law. But the fear was that if a bad ideology or bad ideas got or faction got control of a state, that they would start passing election laws that would be crooked. They needed to have Congress there to be able to basically negative a state law. And the federal government negativing state law was something that was brought in from the very beginning through the Virginia plan and was shot down almost completely. So, like I like to tell people, it had to be pretty darn important if they were willing to make an exception. And this is one of the exceptions they made in allowing the federal legislature to negative a state law if they believe the state law to be egregiously unconstitutional, or for the federal government to make laws. And so that's what it's coming down to.
Yeah, and that's why the Save America Act is 100% constitutional if John Thune would actually get off his rear end and get that thing through. But and that brings up another question: is there such thing? We get this argument that goes, well, if it's a local and state election, it's none of the federal government's business. But are these federal elections? Mm-hmm. If the House of Representatives or the Senate's involved, it does not make it a federal election. Now, I can make the argument that it isn't a federal election because your House, your Congress people are supposed to represent their local constituents, and then they go to D.C. to represent the state, so it's not a federal election. President of the United States, of course, would be a federal election, but in this particular case, it's been interpreted that if you're going to Washington, D.C., it is a federal election.
Well, and a key point about the president is the presidential election is not mentioned in Article 1, Section 4. It's actually mentioned in a different section of the Constitution. And actually, the federal Congress has no authority over the presidential election. It is completely up to the state legislatures, and it's only supposed to be about choosing the electors. The popular vote's not even supposed to matter, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of amendments address that as well. Mm-hmm. So it is not. All right, so let me jump into this real quick. I'm not going to read this whole thing. Parties to the proceeding, long table of contents. This is the actual filing by the petitioners. Then I'm just going to read the introduction. This case turns on the meaning of the federal election day statutes. Those statutes set the Tuesday after the first Monday of November in certain years as federal election day. Like all states, Mississippi requires that ballots for federal offices be cast, marked, and submitted to election officials by federal election day. And like most states, Mississippi allows some of those timely cast ballots, mail-in, absentee ballots in Mississippi, to be counted if election officials receive them soon after Election Day. In Mississippi, this is 5 business days. Mississippi Code, blah, blah, blah. The Court of Appeals held here that federal law requires that ballots be received by Election Day and so preempts Mississippi's law. They go on to say this.
Real quick. So the law that they're talking about that established Election Day was from 1845. And what's fascinating about this is also those who are arguing against in favor of Watson. They're arguing what they typically argue when it comes to things that are from a past era. Well, it's antiquated. They didn't understand.
All right, so let's get into the
19th century Congress. What did they know? Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So the argument that Watson's representative is going to be making, he says the decision below is wrong. An election is the conclusive choice of an officer. This is a game of semantics, okay? Mm-hmm. The voters make that choice by casting, marking and submitting their ballots. So the federal election day statutes require only the voters cast their ballots by election day. Now, in the case of California, you can basically, it can be 5 days after the election, you can submit a ballot, handwrite in the date, and nobody can check it. Once again, it's a huge loophole. Mm-hmm. The election has then occurred, even if the election officials do not receive all ballots by that day. Under Mississippi law, the voters cast their ballots on by election day, so federal law does not preempt Mississippi law. Text, precedent, and history show that the Court of Appeals erred in ruling otherwise. Now, that's one of the other things that's important is the Court of Appeals has already said that now election day means election day.
And I want people to understand something. This is a recent deal with California. Remember, I mentioned that I had an absentee ballot way back in 1984. I was instructed make sure you mail it early enough so that it arrives by election day. If it does not arrive by election day, it will not be counted.
And that's pretty easy to do. Sometimes
I gave it 2 weeks, by the way.
Yeah, and the mail's occasionally slow, but 2 weeks should be plenty of time. And when the election day is, years in fact, I can tell you when the election is 100 years from now. So it'll be the first Tuesday after the second Monday.
So the question is, what he was reading and what the argument is it comes down to what is the meaning of election, what is the meaning of when the election is, and who is determining that meaning. And from an originalist point of view, the election at the time of the founding was it was a discrete event that concluded when polls closed, not a process that continued indefinitely while ballots arrived. And we have to understand that the text of this law states that electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the legislature, which they argue is implicitly incorporate state deadlines for receiving ballots. That's what the other side's saying. So we have an argument here of, okay, so who really gets the say? Of course, the concerns are that when you allow states to count ballots received after election day, and other states aren't, you're also not following this idea of uniformity. You want the uniformity. So, and this is where the federal government is tasked with making law to create this uniformity. Getting back to what you were saying, though, go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to go into, we're going to listen to some of the oral arguments here. And I'm going to play about, 10, 60, 90-second clips. And what you're going to see from the nature of the questions asked by the justices is it really looks like they're leaning towards upholding this decision.
They appear to be very skeptical of state laws that are counting mail-in ballots after election day. Very much so. And we're not just talking, Thomas and Alito.
No, it's but the only person who doesn't weigh in really strongly is Roberts. He's the only one who I can't really tell where he's going with it, but he does say a couple things. But this is definitely going to, for me, this may come down 7-2 because even Sotomayor looks like she's going to be the right direction on this one. So even with your MotorVoter, even with your ballot harvesting, even with your universal mail-in ballots, if we can cut it down so that everything's got to be in by election day and get our results that night, you're going to add a lot more trust to the system and get rid of a huge opportunity for fraud. And that's why they're fighting so hard. They wouldn't fight so hard if something that's just common sense that election day means election day, sort of like, Christmas Day means Christmas Day. Happens on the same day. It's a single day. The definition of the word day shouldn't be up for interpretation. So, with no further ado, let's go into the oral arguments. All right, I'm going to just hit real quick, make sure you can hear me. Hear it?
Mm-hmm.
24-1260.
You can hear that?
Yes.
All right. Make sure the volume's up. And you can read along as they go. This is a really good YouTube. So, just Roberts is ready to gavel it in. And the opening argument for the defendant is going to, for Watson, is going to speak first. This is the Attorney General of Mississippi, a guy by the name of Stewart.
Watson versus Republican National Committee. Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. States have broad power over elections. Throughout our history, they've used that power to change how they hold elections. Nowhere is that change more apparent than in Election Day itself. Congress set the federal election day in 1845. At the time, everyone voted in person. There was no absentee voting. There was no secret ballot. Voters challenged each other's qualifications at the polls on Election Day, and states received ballots on Election Day. Over time, states changed all those practices. They did so as Congress extended Election Day to all federal offices. They've done so ever since. No one claims that in setting the federal election day, Congress blocked most of those changes. The dispute is whether Congress blocked just one change, allowing ballots cast by Election Day to be received after that day. States have allowed that for over a century. Congress has respected it. No one challenged it until now. The question is whether Congress in 1845 blocked that practice. The answer is no. The Election Day statutes adopt a simple rule. States must make a final choice of officers by Election Day. That is the plain meaning of an election. As this court said in United States versus Classic, from time immemorial, an election to public office has been in point of substance no more and no less than the expression by qualified electors of their choice of candidates. Mississippi satisfies that rule. It makes a choice on Election Day. And only that rule respects the last 180 years of state lawmaking. If Election Day must be what it was in 1845, that takes out much more than the ballot receipt laws of 30 states today. It dooms absentee voting, modern methods of voting, the secret ballot, and more. Congress did not adopt that destabilizing view when it simply set the Election Day. The Fifth Circuit was wrong to rule otherwise. This court should reverse. I welcome the court's questions.
Stop it for a second. This is interesting because the argument being used is the usual argument that we see from the progressive left. If you allow this, then all of this is thrown out. And that's not it at all. And to throw in absentee ballot, that's not what this is about. And as I said earlier, but that's the argument that typically is used by left-wing politics is, you know, if you allow or don't allow this one thing, the entire system is flawed. The entire system is poisoned, and you're
disenfranchising voters.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and one of my favorites is, you know, when it comes to voter ID. Well, what about someone who's born in the woods who doesn't have access to their birth certificate? Maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, that might have still been. We just don't have that now, the way we do our record keeping. And so even if the argument held any validity, it's not the case. And even if it was, you destroy an entire system because of the possibility of a handful, or maybe only one or two, or at worst, maybe a dozen or two possible situations where it might be hard for them. And any obstacle is a problem here. And then this is kind of the argument. And if there's any obstacle whatsoever, then you have to throw everything out with the bathwater.
Yeah, because it's, you know, you got to save my democracy. Everyone should get a vote. One person, one vote, even though the Constitution does not say that. It says you're supposed to.
Well, and that's something else interesting is when he talked about how every public office has come down to, you know, being voted in. And that's a kind of a side slap reference to the changes in electoral college, the 17th Amendment, and things like that.
Yeah, he also says something interesting. We talked about the secret ballot, and I want to make a really clear point. Election shenanigans are hardly new in this country. There's been cheating in elections since there have been elections. Mm-hmm. The secret ballot came about because what was going on in the 1800s, we just started the area of industrialization, and to get a job, you had to hit a factory. You had to go through what's called the ward boss, and he determined who got jobs and who didn't. And the payoff for giving you a job was you had to vote for his candidates. That's how they wielded political power. That's how we got the secret ballot, because, you know, you're fresh off the boat Irishman. You don't want to vote for the jerk that the ward boss is telling you to, but they can tell who you voted for, and so there's no way around it. But once we got the secret ballot, they could no longer use that leverage of your, you know, basically dictating your vote by holding your job over your head. We had Tammany Hall in New York is famous for it. Illinois elections are famously crooked. This is not new. Lincoln's elections were about the shadiest we ever saw. You had soldier. Well, we'll get to that later because that actually comes up. So Thomas is the first to weigh in, and obviously we want to listen to what Joe.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, you said in your opening statement, sometimes you said the choice has to be made by Election Day. And at other points, you say on Election Day, which is it?
I think the statewide choice needs to be made by or on Election Day itself when the entire electorate has voted, Justice Thomas. I think voters themselves need to make their individual selections by Election Day.
If I give my mail-in ballot to my neighbor, is that a choice?
It's a choice. It's not a final choice that can be recognized in the context of an election.
So when do I know whether or not a choice is final?
When you've submitted to the appropriate state election official through the designated state process.
So why isn't it the rule then that the final or the formalized decision, electoral decision, isn't made until that's done?
Until it's submitted to the official, Your Honor. I think the choice is made once the voters as a whole have made an irrevocable decision by casting their ballots. A final choice. They've
Well,
cast their
if I
ballots.
made a final choice when I handed it to my neighbor.
But it's a final choice within an official state process, Justice Thomas. Which,
Well, I think the ballot is an official state process. Is that enough?
not enough to be known in a public way to the state. That happens when it is parted with and submitted through mail to the appropriate election official. Then it's final.
Here's Roberts is going to weigh in, and he doesn't say a whole lot today, so pay a lot of attention to what he says in this paragraph.
If day includes a period after a particular day of the election, does it include a particular day before the day of the election? Or does your logic require a different consideration?
All right, so I mean, I love, obviously Clarence Thomas is brilliant with his short common sense questions. He's trying to break it down to the simplest common denominator. What is actually a day? And you can see the attorney, Stewart, is the Solicitor General, is wiggling around because the whole foundation of his argument is kind of hanging on the edge on this concept. I'm going to fast forward to 1430 mark, where Alito comes in.
Alito is my favorite, though. As much as I love Thomas, and he's right there with Alito, Alito is actually my favorite of all of the justices. I think Alito leans more towards originalist. Thomas is more of a textualist, and there is a difference.
That what is that whatever the date that's set as election day, right?
That's right. Your Honor.
And you have a variety of line drawing problems. So we've been exploring one. To whom and by what means is the ballot to be delivered to the state? But what about the length of time that a state could choose? Isn't it the case that some state allows, will count ballots that are received 21 days after election day?
There are a couple that at the outlier, it's kind of canvassing and it can go that far. I think more common
Is that okay?
That's one of the other issues you have in California is what's called ballot curing. And to give them, you give yourself weeks to go out and track down ballots, say, okay, we couldn't accept your ballot. What did you actually mean to do? And again, there's no chain of custody. There's no supervision of that at all.
Right.
Hey, is that all right?
As far as the federal election day statutes are concerned, yes, Your Honor. And I think this actually gets to a good point that loops back to something Justice Gorsuch was getting at in a certain way, which I think he was saying, what in the federal election day statutes decides that? I think that's the key point in our favor. This is an area where states get to go first, make these decisions. Congress can step in, but the idea.
So there's no limit, except I suppose the day when the presidential electors have to be appointed, or the day when the next Congress begins, starts its session. That's the only limit on counting.
And he's making a brilliant point. Legally, when do you have to actually have your ballot in? Could you wait until January? January.
What
6th?
he's establishing is there has to be a line. There has to be a line somewhere. And so, what is it? And they don't have a line. They're saying that it's arbitrary. And from that logic, I think Alito is saying. I mean, what you're basically saying is it could be 2 years from now. I mean, it just makes no sense. There has to be a limit because things have to proceed beyond there. And so now he's not necessarily saying when that line has to be. He's saying that there has to be a line.
Yeah, and you can tell that line is going to be, the obvious conclusion that line should be election day.
Right.
Period. That is the logical conclusion. And unless you have got mischief in mind, you really can't draw another conclusion.
Right.
On counting mail-in ballots.
Those are some of the limits, Your Honor. But I'd also say that the federal election day statutes don't require states to count ballots at all. It doesn't speak to counting, period. So, I mean, if a state really didn't want
not counting, but being delivered. So I do think it is a consequence, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but just so we can wrap this up, that by any means and by any date up until the next Congress meets, a state can receive ballots.
I think for congressional races, potentially, yes, Your Honor. I think there are other.
He just put his foot in the grave right there. Would you not agree? I mean, there's no coming back from that argument.
There are Title III kind of things that push action earlier in the presidential context. But again, I mean, there's nothing. The key question is these are three one-sentence provisions, and we want to be, I think, very careful not to read them for more than they're worth.
And counsel, I was just going to say, isn't your point that the line drawing?
Ketanji Brown Jackson, people. She's trying to bail him out. I'll go ahead and play this for 30 seconds.
Issues that have been raised are only problems to the extent that Congress thought they were problems. We're in a preemption dynamic. And so the question, I think, really is, what did Congress intend with its statement about Election Day? Did it mean to cabin the states so that they did not have the discretion to make these kinds of decisions? And in addition to what Justice Sotomayor.
All right, when we are all now collectively more stupid.
Well, and she says something that's fascinating. Shows that she has a lack of any understanding of history. She is framing these laws as being preemptive. We're trying to avoid something from happening. No, they passed those laws because something happened. Past tense. They are correcting issues in the past. This was not preemptive. This is not like, oh, someday in the future, a bunch of MAGA people is going to do something. This is not what the law was about. It was not preempting anything. It was trying to correct things that had already happened. And that's in line with Article 1, Section 4. Article 1, Section 4 doesn't give Congress the authority to preempt. It gives the Congress authority to alter such regulations. In other words, something has happened, it needs to be fixed. And that's how the 1845 Election Day law was passed, with that in mind. There had been issues, and so therefore there needed to be an alteration federally in order to make sure that there was uniformity.
Before we go forward, I got to, for those who were really into election integrity, Seth Keshel has a Substack that's really worth checking out. He's been all over this California elections, and he makes some great arguments. So I highly recommend everybody go check out Seth Keshel's Substack. It's good stuff. I've been following him closely. All right, we're going to fast forward to 19-minute mark. Neil Gorsuch is about to speak.
When you put something in the mail, you're not, I think.
That's not an election official. FedEx isn't an election official.
Right, but the recipient certainly is the person who you're submitting it in the mail to. I mean, that is the recipient.
Of course.
And
I should probably go back a little bit for this one.
Has decided with regard to
Officials on Election Day must be cast by Election Day, and that the Election Day is the day to conclude and consummate the election through a final selection. You agree with all those statements in your brief?
yes,
Okay. But at the same time, you say, actually, it doesn't have to be submitted to an election official. It just has to be submitted to a common carrier. And there's a contradiction there that I just want you to first address, and then I'll give you my hypothetical.
very good, Your Honor. I think when you put something in the mail, you're not, I think.
That's not an election official. FedEx isn't an election official.
Right, but the recipient certainly is the person who you're submitting it in the mail to. I mean, that is the recipient.
Of course.
And right, Your Honor. And I think
You submit it to FedEx and they deliver it to the election official. But you say it has to be submitted to an election official throughout your brief, but then you say a common carrier is okay. And those two things don't add up.
He's going to go into a hypothetical here, which just absolutely, I think, puts a nail in the coffin. So this one's worth listening to.
well, I think the difference is, say, sending it to your brother versus sending it to the registrar.
Well, we already dealt with that. The brother turns out to be okay, so long as the state says so.
I think that's okay on their view, Your Honor. I'm
also
a
okay.
little more guarded up.
I think you already answered that one. So here's the hypo. Let's say you have a state where a large portion of the electorate mails in their ballots on or close to Election Day. Not far-fetched. Many states are like that. Then the day after the election, a story breaks that one of the lead candidates engaged in an inappropriate sexual escapade, or perhaps is concluding with a foreign power. Again, not far-fetched, I think. And the competing candidate immediately goes on the airwaves and urges voters to recall their ballots and to tell the common carriers not to deliver them. And many common carriers will do that with anything that you send through them. FedEx, you just call them up and say, I want it back. In that hypothetical, did the election happen on election day? Oh, by the way, it swings the election.
It's pretty, I think it's a pretty valid point he's making, this hypothetical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no comment. And Gorsuch is an interesting guy. He was, when it comes to my constitutional view of him, he was shaky in the beginning, but over the last year or two, I've really watched him develop.
And I think I could say the same thing about Amy Coney Barrett. Her votes have been much better, and the decision has been a lot stronger. And we've speculated that part of that might have to do with KBJ's presence on the court. She's just so radical. She's so radical left that she's pushing everyone to the right.
Yeah, Jackson. Well, Jackson's not just to the left, but she's so far to the left that she tries to squeeze everything into the narrative, and so she doesn't really look at what's before her. She doesn't look at the facts. She doesn't look at the evidence, and sometimes she doesn't even seem to understand what the evidence is, to the point where we've even seen Sotomayor say a few things. Or did you even read the case? So it is fascinating to watch with Jackson on that court.
Yeah. So going back to Gorsuch's hypothetical, what he's really saying is, a vote ballot isn't cast until it reaches the designated state official's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can recall that ballot and change your mind after election day, did the vote actually happen? Because it hasn't reached the official. It's still in the mail or with FedEx. And it's a really strong argument for limiting this to election day.
So the election did happen on election day, Justice Gorsuch. As we've explained, our ballot does not allow using mail recall, anything like that. When somebody submits their ballot by mail,
just first deal with my hypothetical, and then I'll deal with your statute.
Okay, the election happened on election day.
Even though it changes the outcome.
I mean, I think it
has to be your answer, doesn't it?
I mean, yes, Your Honor. I want to be clear about
All right.
We are not agreeing that the outcome can be properly changed in that circumstance.
Well, hold on. It did in my hypothetical. You can't change my hypothetical, counsel.
And I'm just saying it's unlawful, Your Honor. I don't mean to disparage your hypothetical. I'm just saying that it's an unlawful circumstance because we don't allow ballot.
Oh, in Mississippi. Okay. But that hypothetical could happen in another state, right?
I think if the state is not providing that on mailing there's a final choice made, I think that would be a problem with that law under the federal statute.
Now you say your statute, you're different. You admit my hypothetical could happen, but you say it can't happen in Mississippi because recall's not allowed. I couldn't find that anywhere in Mississippi law. In fact, what I did see was a statute that says that the Secretary of State can promulgate rules and regulations. That's 23-15-637-3. And then I went and looked at the regulations, and Rule 2.1 says that an absentee ballot is the final vote of a voter when the ballot is marked accepted. That doesn't preclude recall. And in fact, that allows recall.
I respectfully don't agree with that, Your Honor. I mean,
where does it say recall's not permitted? I couldn't find that anywhere in your statutes or the rule.
I think he's got his back up against the wall on this one, don't you?
Yeah, he calls us bluff. He calls BS, and I think it's brilliant how he did it because the best way sometimes to kill an argument is with what the law actually says. And that's the reason why, at the beginning of this conversation, first thing I did is I went to Article 1, Section 4. We don't know if a congressional law can do this. Yes, it does. It says it in plain black and white. There's nothing that says otherwise. And so I think it was definitely a brilliant approach to this. Oh, so we got Justice Barrett. You just talked about her.
Yeah, she's going to talk about, can your neighbor deliver your ballot? Okay. So this is pretty good here.
And whether the ballot is received before or after the election, on all sides, everybody agrees that absentee ballots can be turned in by having, the neighbor, the party operative or whatever, scoop them up and bring them to the ballot box?
Your Honor, I mean, maybe, I'm not sure if I answered the earlier thing as crisply as I could. I'm not comfortable with the neighbor piece. I do have serious concerns about that.
But is that tied to the ballot receipt problem, or is that just tied to, hey, maybe this is an unlawful way
Well, if you're not comfortable with the neighbor doing the ballot, why are you okay with ballot harvesting in California?
of executing absentee balloting, regardless of when the ballots make it to the official?
I think it's the finality of the choice that has to be done by election day. And
Okay.
my concern is that if you're not sending it by mail or common carrier.
You're getting caught up, counsel, again. Could you go back to the question? Justice Barrett is not arguing with you.
Sure, Your
What
Honor.
she's saying, and what you said earlier is, and you believe that under your adversary, the opposing counsel's theory, you can give it to the RNC operative. You can give it to anybody. And so long as it's received on election day by the state, that's okay. That's what you're saying, your opposing counsel is saying. And you're saying the only question before us is if they can designate an appropriate vehicle to.
There's no chain of custody, Doug, under that scenario.
Right. And Sotomayor is kind of, again, she surprises me every once in a while. And she is one that sometimes does vote with the alleged opposition on the court. But I found it fascinating that she jumped in there, say, hey, Barrett's not arguing with you. This is what she's trying to say. Here, let me clarify for her. And then kind of takes the nail that was already being driven in by Barrett and gives it a couple final whacks. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, she's good today.
Well,
Okay.
maybe she shares a desk every once in a while with one of her alleged opponents. I don't know. I used to argue that there was a particular state legislator in Southern California that I used to I knew quite well, but his votes when he was on city council were always suspect. But once he got to the legislation, he suddenly got very, very on target. And I teased him, Jeff Stone, and I teased Jeff Stone and told him the reason why he was getting more conservative over time is he was sharing a desk with Mike Morrell. And so that's the reason why I was kind of quipping here that maybe Sotomayor is hanging out with some of the other justices and finding out a few things and learning a little bit from them, perhaps.
All right, next up, we've got Alito, and he's going to talk about the trustworthiness of the deliverer, and that's important.
After the election day, votes can be received. A third is whether it has to be postmarked. Aren't there 8 states that do not require a postmark for late ballots?
There are a number of states that don't require that, Your Honor. I think postmarking is, of course, it's good evidence that something has been timely submitted. That's kind of borne out in the tax context. I think, if somebody were challenging a law like that, it would potentially be a very different kind of a challenge. They'd have to make sort of factual showings to challenge that ballots were not cast by election day, but surely not this case.
No, maybe it's inevitable that some sort of line drawing decisions like these have to be made, unless the rule is anything goes. States can do anything they want in this area. We don't have a whole lot to go on here. We have the phrase election day, and we have history. If we looked just at the phrase election day, what would we take from that? I think you've been saying we're moving in this direction. We don't have election day anymore. We have election month, or we have election months. I mean, the early voting can start a month before the election. The ballots can be received a month after the election.
Well, I think the best way to read it, Your Honor, is that by setting election day, the Congress set the final choice day. And that's the key thing, final choice day. What Congress was concerned about at the time was some states making final choices, say, a month before.
Any doubts about how Alito's going to be voting?
Not at all.
All right, so I'm going to fast forward to Gorsuch. He's going to talk more about the recall question, because I think it's really important. So I watched all 2 hours of this, everybody, so you don't have to. You can only get the highlights. Come on.
Election day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mrs. Gorsuch?
Almost done, Mr. Stewart. You emphasized to Justice Kagan and many others that the final choice at least has to be done on election day. And so recall would be a problem for you if it could happen. But you say that doesn't happen in Mississippi. That's your position, right?
Right, it's not permitted.
If recall could happen, that would be a problem for your position.
I think there potentially, I think
Because then it wouldn't be a final decision on election day, right?
That's right, Your Honor. I think
Okay.
there'd still be a factual question though, whether I still have not been cited anything to say that recall is actually a thing that can happen in the world.
I understand, but if it could happen, that would be a problem for your theory because the final choice wouldn't have happened on election day, right?
Fair, yep.
Okay. So you say Mississippi prohibits it. We've been through whether that's the case or not.
Very good.
But let's say it did. Let's say there was a law prohibiting recall. How would it ever be enforced? Because how is a state to know? And how is even a common carrier carrying an envelope to know whether that is a ballot that needs to be recalled? And who are you going to prosecute?
Well, I think it could be enforced similar to other voter things. I mean, in our state, there are notarization and affidavit requirements, signing things. I think one of the, if it were critical for the voter to say that there will be no recall, the voter could say, I hereby commit that I will not attempt to or recall this package in any way, shape, or form. They could just add that, sign it. I take the point about proof problems, but I mean, gosh, Justice Gorsuch, I mean, violating state election laws in a state that really is anti-fraud and really takes wide measures to enforce its laws, that would be quite a thing for a voter to do.
Well, in my hypothetical, which, you say is unlikely, there's swing an election and all of that on recall. But as soon, if history teaches anything, scant or not scant, it's that as soon as something's allowed, it will happen eventually, right?
That just speaks to what we talked about with the motive and opportunity. We just you present people with an opportunity and loopholes, somebody's going to exploit it because the amount of power in politics is it's worth people breaking the rules. And now you've created rules that allow for lack of transparency and lack of chain of custody and all those things. And what Gorsuch is saying is it's inevitable.
My dad used to say to me when I was a young man, best way not to allow something to happen is don't put yourself in that position in the first place. And that's exactly what's happening here. They want something to allow to happen, so they put themselves in that position. They're trying to put the system in that position. They're saying, oh, no, we don't believe in fraud, but they're allowing that opportunity. It's like me saying, oh, no, I don't want to get beat up at a party, but then going to a place where it's a bunch of bikers and gangbangers at a party. Well, guess what? Whether it doesn't matter how much you say you don't want to, it's probably going to happen because you put yourself in that position.
Yeah, you've created a greater likelihood of the undesirable outcome happening. Why not prevent that in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole thing about these election.
Isn't that why we change the oil in our cars, folks? But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's the whole thing about these election, quote unquote, election integrity lawyers like Mark Elias running around the country, is they're basically arguing that, make an argument from the standpoint that nobody would ever do anything dishonest, even though we're creating loopholes to provide them that opportunity. It's counterintuitive to me. It's an intellectual.
It reminds me of this couple that I every once in a while watch on YouTube, and it's this couple, and the guy usually says things that gets the wife going or whatever, and he starts this one joke, and it sounds like it might be a little unscrupulous, and she'll say, Michael, are you going to tell a dirty joke? I would never, ever, and then he does, and that's kind of what I'm seeing here. No, we would never allow that to happen. As they got something in their hand and they're reaching behind them and handing it off to somebody else.
And you have no examples of voter fraud. And then we show them like the 50 people that have been arrested in California just in the last 5 years.
But don't happen that often.
Well, then it says, it's not enough to swing the election. How do you know? How do you know if you won't let us look and audit? Yeah. We've gotten past the trust us phase of this. All right, up next is Kavanaugh, and this is going to be pretty good. He's going to talk about the recent changes, how and why they were made to election law.
When did Mississippi switch to this method?
2020. In 2024, added common carriers.
And why?
It was first because of the pandemic. I don't know that there's necessarily an answerable why as to the 2024 one in a clear way.
And the other side makes a point when we're looking at history, to the extent historical practice is relevant, that it only became widespread to allow it to be mailed by election day in more recent years, and that the predominant approach was to require receipt by election day throughout the historical practice you cite until very recently. How are we supposed to think about that?
He's asking the right question, Doug. Why did you make all these changes to give more opportunity for shenanigans to take place? Why? Give me an answer.
And I've got a one-word answer. Trump.
I mean, I think it's the same way to think about, I think the broader history of election law is when states have kind of seen a problem, they've adapted and adjusted, often in the direction of making sure that more votes can be counted. I mean, that was
and they should be making sure only legitimate votes are counted, not more votes. They should be raising the bar to the ability to vote, not making it easier for anybody, especially when you have an open border. All right, that's enough of us, Stuart. Let's move on to his counterpart. Oh, wait a minute. We got to do real quick. We got a Ketanji Brown Jackson moment.
For the entertainment value, or because she actually says something worth a dang?
I'll let you judge for yourself.
Amicus brief focused on the Electoral College and Congress is setting it up, back in 1787 with the understanding that the casting of votes can happen on a particular day and the receipt of those votes by election officials can happen on a different day. And in fact, the way the Electoral College is set up, I think at the time, Congress permitted in 1792 about a month to elapse between the casting of votes, which, by the way, it called Election Day, and the receipt of the votes by the electors submitted them to the President of the Senate.
She's trying to say that there's a historical precedence to having the votes actually cast and recognized months later.
Yeah. Well, you're A, comparing apples to oranges. B, you're not taking into account the historical context of the time. The electors, had to cast the votes at their location. Then they needed to be transmitted to Washington, D.C. to be counted by the President of the Senate in front of a joint session. They couldn't jump on a plane to get them there.
They couldn't send a telegraph?
Shit.
Hadn't been invented yet, people. So it's just a total false equivalence. So
only Jackson could get me to use an expletive. Anyway, all right, go.
That's enough of KBJ for now.
Oh, man, she is something.
We're going to go to Clement's opening statement.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, all agree that elections for federal office have to end on the day of the election specified by Congress. And all agree that you can't have an election unless you receive ballots, and there must be some deadline for ballot receipt. Nonetheless, Mississippi insists that ballots can trickle in days or even weeks after Election Day. That position is wrong as a matter of text, precedent, history, and common sense. Mississippi all but concedes that the original public meaning of election included both offering to vote and the receipt of that vote or ballot by election officials. And of course, the key distinction between voting and an election is that an election involves the combined action of voters and election officials, as this court underscored in its decision against Foster against Love. And of course, Mississippi insists that at the time these statutes were passed, ballot receipt and the casting of the ballot were so inextricably intertwined, no one would have thought of one without the other. That seems to me to be a damning admission, but it also ignores the advent of field and proxy voting in the Civil War and the enormous efforts that states went to ensure that all of the ballots, whether by proxy or by field vote, were received by Election Day. In the state's view, all of those Herculean efforts were for naught or were entirely gratuitous. Now, the state's position actually works even worse as a matter of common sense. If somebody in Gulfport the day after the election asks, is the election over? The common sense answer is no, it's not. The ballots are still coming in. And if somebody asks who won, the truthful answer is we don't know yet. The ballots are still coming in, and they may trickle in for weeks or months. And in fact, they may trickle in for weeks or months with or without a postmark in differing ways in differing states. That reality gives the lie to the idea that we have a uniform national election day. I welcome.
Sound vaguely familiar, huh?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Thomas.
And like I said, when I had the one time I did an absentee ballot, the instructions were make sure you mail it soon enough so that it gets there by election day. If it is not, and I said, well, gosh, I don't have control of the post office. If they're going to take a long time, then give yourself enough time. Be responsible. So part of the argument here is Americans don't have to be responsible with this incredibly important privilege that we have as a citizen. We don't have to be responsible. We can be willy-nilly. And at the same time, we can have a chain of custody that isn't strictly controlled. Voting is not a decision on whether or not to go to the market. It is a very important part of what our system is all about. Now, while we are not a democracy, voting democratic principles have always been included, blended in with our republic. And the voting part of it is very important. The voting part of it should be treated as very important. And to have a willy-nilly, we get it when we get it attitude disrespects the voters, it disrespects the process, and it opens up so much opportunity for shenanigans, for irregularities, anomalies, and now that I've used the words that everybody else uses, let me use my word, fraud. It opens up so many doors for that it's ridiculous. Going back to my dad's advice, if you don't want something bad to happen, don't put yourself in that position in the first place.
So it's funny they mentioned the Civil War voting as an example of pristine elections. That was one of the dirtiest elections in history. You had the know-nothings running around intimidating voters. Those were big radical Republican Lincoln backers, and the voter intimidation was off the charts. But you also had the Union Army members were voting in multiple states, and they would do it by horseback. They basically ride into a new camp and vote in one state, ride to the next one. This is documented. It happened, and even with all that, with the other southern states gone, Lincoln only won a popular vote with 55% over McClellan, who was a Democrat. So, this idea that Lincoln was, beloved in the North, he won his first election with only 40.4% of the popular vote. He won the electoral college, but that's just an interesting historical side note. Justice Thomas is about to weigh in on the Civil War voting, and I think it's worth listening to.
Welcome the court's questions.
How would you define the day of election?
I would say that the day of the election is it's the last day in which all the ballots are cast and they are received into official custody.
So how would you treat early voting as compared to late reception of votes?
So I would say, I think the best place to look for a treatment of early voting is the Kreisling decision by Judge Kleinfeld in the Ninth Circuit. Because after Foster against Love, there was a suggestion in Foster against Love that maybe early voting is a problem. He rejected that claim based on two things. One is the distinct history of early voting, and the second is the idea that was explicit in this court's decision in Foster against Love that election day is the date of consummation. So I would say under our theory, early voting is permissible, largely because it has a different history and because of this idea that the election day is the date where the election is.
Doug, you want to contrast the risks of early voting versus late voting?
That's a good question, because we talked about this earlier. If you have early voting and it's getting counted ahead of time, and then you also have late voting to go along with it, the early voting and the voting day, you have a good idea of exactly how many votes you need to overcome to get your guy in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. You can manufacture votes after the fact, and with a loose chain of custody,
because once you have that number, you want that number. You want the number of what you need. And then what happens is because you don't want to look like you're cheating, you get just enough to get over. You can always go back to that chart that you showed earlier when it comes to LA. Just enough.
Same charts we saw in the presidential election in 5 states that stopped counting for the first time in history. All of a sudden, you have a big bounce.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big bounce for Biden.
It's consummated.
Would you spend a few more minutes on, or at least a little bit more time on the voting during Civil War? There was some suggestion that that's an example of late reception of votes. And I think in your intro, and was my thinking, that it was not, that proxy voting was a way to make sure that the vote occurred on election day as opposed to afterwards.
Well, not surprisingly, Justice Thomas, you were exactly right. So proxy voting is the thing that happened in the Civil War that is most analogous to absentee voting. And the thing that is most striking is I think 5 states had proxy voting. Every one of those 5 states required the votes, the ballots, to be received by election officials back home by election day. Now, that's an incredibly inconvenient thing that was done in the Civil War to ensure the ballots were received by election day. And under the state's view, they didn't need to do that. Now, it's really no different in the context of field voting because there were like maybe a dozen states, if you're not going to count the Confederate states, there are about a dozen states that did field voting. Again, every one of those ensured that the ballots were received into official custody by election day.
I think the point they're making is, when, hammering home, when is a vote actually cast? When is it official? And it's when the voter has conveyed their intent to the state voting official, and not when it's dropped in the mail. I'm going to fast forward a bit. Justice Sotomayor has some interesting things to say. He's going to talk about Nevada and Rhode Island. There's Rhode Island again.
And what do I do with the 2 states during the Civil War? Rhode Island, Nevada, you say 5 favor you, at least 2 don't. Nevada simply designated 3 of the highest officers in command, didn't swear them in, just said 3 officers in the command can create a ballot box or suitable receptacle for votes and collect the votes of the soldiers with little further formality. Those military officers then would mail those ballots in, and they would be counted whether they arrived on election day or after. What do we do with Rhode Island that simply directed soldiers to deliver a written or printed ballot with the name of the person voted for to the officer commanding the regiment to which he belonged? That officer wasn't sworn in as a state official either, and receipt could happen thereafter. So it's not, yes, many states believed, as they did at the time, that voting had to be in person, that voting had to be it had to be by voice instead of by paper. Lots of states had lots of beliefs about what a proper election should look on. But how do we deal with the outliers? Or you just want to ignore them?
No, I don't want to ignore the outliers. I actually think Rhode Island and Nevada help me and my side of this case. And I think that's because they did designate somebody, they might not have given him an oath, but they designated somebody as an official to receive the votes. And they had to come in.
So they're here, what's the difference between the post office and a common carrier?
I think he shut down our question pretty well. And once again, we see Rhode Island being an outlier. I'm going to fast forward again. 111. This should be Clement, and he's going to talk a bit about Chicago voting.
UACAVA voters and UACAVA voters only, they can email their ballots in. So like the idea that anybody is going to be disenfranchised here when the overseas voters and only the overseas voters have the option of emailing in the absentee ballot that they get from Mississippi seems to me to completely be misplaced. And the concern should really be the heartland cases. And remember, as Justice Alito alluded to, you have 8 states that don't even require a postmark. And there is nothing in Mississippi's theory that turns on the existence or the non-existence of a postmark. And that's probably a good thing, because the Post Service has made clear that they don't even postmark all of the mail. And postmarks have their own problems. I mean, the main mailbox, post box in post office rather in Chicago stays open 24/7. So when all the other polls close in Illinois or every other state at 8 p.m., post box, the post office is still open till midnight. Now, I'm not here to say that there could ever be voting fraud in Chicago, but
It's pretty good, huh? But what the point he's making, he's going to sum it up here.
But the possibility that there's a 4-hour window where people could go get their ballots, absentee ballots postmarked after all of the returns are in, and they know that, oh, this is the election where these things could turn the result, that does not seem entirely
So is your
far-fetched.
argument that we could,
So I got 4 more clips to play. And so we should be done shortly. And this is Alito talking about Election Day.
We have lots of phrases that involve 2 words, the second of which is day. Labor Day, Memorial Day, George Washington's birthday, Independence Day, birthday, and Election Day. And they're all particular days. So if we start with that, if I have nothing more to look at than the phrase Election Day, I think this is the day in which everything is going to take place, or almost everything. And then we have 3 points in time, 1844, 1872, 1914. And we can ask, what would people have thought on those days is meant by this phrase, Election Day? Which of those should we choose? Which of those dates should we choose?
Well, I think you could choose any of the 3. I mean, honestly, I think the single best one, if you're just going to choose one, is 1872. And the reason I say that is because 1914 is the latest in time, but that's the one that Congress gave the least thought to, because it was right after the 17th Amendment. They just said, yeah, whatever the rule is for the House of Representatives, we'll use that for the Senate.
Okay, so in 1872, someone sees Election Day, and maybe they start with the idea, okay, it's a particular day, and then they say, but I remember the Civil War, and a big exception was made. There were different practices in the Civil War. It wasn't everybody going to a particular polling place and voting. So what then can we take from that? Should we just take from that, well, this was an incredible national emergency where extraordinary measures had to be taken. What should we take from that?
So obviously he's trying to hammer home the point that Election Day means one day.
Well, he's also hammering home the point that just because you started making changes because of COVID doesn't mean that validates them. That was an extraordinary emergency or whatever you want to call it, and it applies to that and that only. This is not that emergency. I think that's what he's also hammering home there.
Yeah, very good point. All right, Gorsuch is going to give a pretty good summary here.
Early voting, I just want to see if I've got it right. Both sides agree that there needs to be a final decision by the voter and receipt by Election Day. Correct?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think they agree with receipt by Election Day.
Receipt by somebody.
Okay, if you're going to.
I'm going to do that.
The reason I trip up on that.
I know, but just
okay. Sorry.
This is. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. There needs to be some final decision by the voter and receipt by somebody by Election Day. On that, I think you two agree. I think the disagreement is receipt by whom. And for you, it's an election official, and for your friend on the other side, it could be my neighbor. Is that a fair summary of your views? Because it seems to me you both agree that the final decision needs to be made by Election Day, which both of you therefore would permit early voting.
So
Thoughts?
I don't disagree much, but what I would say is my friend's position is a little bit more nuanced than that, because he thinks that sort of selection and submission to the somebody is before election day is a necessary condition. But it's not sufficient, because Mississippi law cares very much about receipt by the registrar.
And that, once again, this goes back to the chain of custody.
Mm-hmm.
All right, two more, because Gorsuch is going to talk about the slippery slope.
To rule against you, is there anything that would limit states from allowing receipt by election officials up until the day of the next Congress?
Oh, the slippery slope problem on the other side, I don't think there's anything that would stop that. And maybe the next state can figure out a way to have an election without even anybody receiving anything. I don't know. But that seems to me to be a large reason for why election day should mean election day, and election should mean casting and receipt into official custody, to stop that slippery slope.
On time. And how about means? Do you see any principled way we could draw a line on?
And I think it's such an important point, the slippery slope. Where are you going to draw the line? And the natural place, of course, would be election day.
And that's what we were saying earlier. There has to be a line somewhere. And the other side seems to be arguing, no, the line could be arbitrary. When I'm playing, a game, there is an out of bounds line. You catch a pass. Well, if he gets only 1 foot in, that's good enough. Well, if his 2 feet are within 2 feet, well, within 5 feet outside. I mean, when you start doing that, there is no line.
Well,
And there has to be a line. That's just the reality with anything that is legal law. There has to be a line. There has to be a line for your stop sign. There has to be a line for your stoplight. And there has to be a line for election day.
It's Calvin ball, Doug. Calvin and Hobbes. Just keep changing the rules as you go along to make sure you never lose.
Yeah.
If we're playing Monopoly and I keep changing the rules on you, are you going to flip over the board? Probably.
Follow up on General Stewart's who decides argument. I think if you're looking at the text in isolation, day for the election, your first instinct might be in-person voting on that day is what that text literally meant. But of course, you acknowledge early voting, you acknowledge absentee voting are consistent with the statute. And then we have obviously a range of historical practices that deviate from that text if you thought literally it meant in-person voting on that day. And then what General Stewart says is, well, given all that history, you can't read it literally. And I think Professor Morley's amicus brief says this as well. And you have to take account of that historical practice. And really, it's up to Congress to fix this if they think there's a policy problem which was going on in the states. I think that's a summary of some of what he's saying. Leave it up to Congress for all these policy concerns. Just want to get your response.
So that's probably enough of the hearing for lack of time, but you get a pretty good idea of what the arguments are and where they're going. That last point that Kavanaugh made about, should Congress be stepping in to fix this? Can they, Doug? Can Congress step in to fix it?
Absolutely.
Not will they? Okay.
Article 1, Section 4 is clear. And like I said, when I used to teach this in a class, I'd get rumbles because I'm like, hey, it's up to the states. States, they're the ones given the manner and all of it. However, Congress can, they may, and I would get grumbles and say, hey, this is what it says. I'm not going to sit here and try to change it for what I think fixes, my narrative. There are times when the federal government needs to get involved and federal law has to supersede, Article 6. If it's constitutionally authorized, then any law to the contrary of the federal law is unconstitutional. It's contrary. It's unconstitutional because that federal law, like the Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. That's just the way it is. Now, obviously, there are times when the federal law isn't, if they're not given the authority. But when it comes to election law, they are.
Well, folks, this is you can tell by the tone of the questions from the Supreme Court justices that they are probably going to make election day again. That's good news for you in California and other states that have been dealing with this thing. You know, you still have the Holy Trinity, but there's less opportunity for after the fact shenanigans, and you've seen the last of those elections. So there is good news, and maybe win some more local elections and start grinding away at the Holy Trinity. But as long as you got MotorVoter, as long as you get ballot harvesting, as long as you got universal mail-in voting, there's way too much opportunity for fraud and shenanigans.
I think this might, though, begin to be a movement towards eliminating universal mail-in voting. I think that might be the next step. And if that's the case, Oregon will stop being blue or purple. I think it would flip the state if there was ballot and ID, ballot box and voter ID. I think Oregon would flip, because while Portland seems to control the state because of democracy, Portland and the college towns to the south of it on the 5, ultimately, I think this state leans a lot more away from the nuttiness that people realize.
Let's hope so, and maybe we can get the Save America.
New Hampshire might be the same. I'm willing to bet that New Hampshire might very well be the same.
Well, New Hampshire's already red. We haven't. Republicans.
Well, I'm just saying, voter ID may make sure that happens.
Well, it's I don't think we have mail-in voting here.
I'm talking about ID though at the box.
Yeah, I think I seem to recall having to produce ID. New Hampshire's weird. You can actually switch your registration on the day of, and then switch it back afterwards. So it's based on the primaries, which I think is a little bit wacky. That once again, it creates opportunity.
It creates the opportunity for the opposing party to interfere with the other party's primary.
And that's the whole point.
Michigan used to do that too. Then they got worse.
If you're trying to create an election system that's free and fair, you're going to start closing down these loopholes. And the fact that these loopholes are getting bigger tells us they don't want to have fair elections, which logic tells us that's fraud. And
you insurrectionist, you.
Darn straight. Doug, thanks for your time.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Everybody,
and I know that was a little long, folks, but I think you enjoyed it. I think you learned something. I think we certainly did too, going through the oral arguments. I had not read the oral arguments. All I knew was, my own research about this case and just watching it. But I'm going to be writing about this case and a couple of other cases I want to write about. So visit me at douglasvgibbs.com if you want to check it out. Very good. And we'll be talking about this after the decision comes in. So keep an eye out. Oh, there's a bunch of decisions that are coming down in the next few weeks. Yeah, we're going to be talking about. We'll have to do another Supreme Court scorecard, I think, this year. Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, we did. If you guys go back on my channel a ways, last couple of years, we've done a Supreme Court scorecard where we looked at the major decisions, and we asked to do it a little bit differently. From a constitutional standpoint, did they make the right decision? Right. And we give them a letter grade A through F, and for the most part, last couple times around they did pretty well. Mm-hmm. But the question we always have to ask is: A, is this something the Supreme Court should even be looking at in the first place, or is it none of their damn business? And quite often, it's none of their damn business. And what's fascinating when we did the scorecard is, while Brady and I usually are relatively close in our way of looking at it, sometimes not so much. And those are the fun ones to talk about. But anyway, well, I think I'm a little bit more extreme on the states' rights and stay the heck out of our business than you are, if possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the differences lie. But okay. All right, very good, everybody. Till the next time. Cheers.